The crystal chandelier cast elegant shadows across the marble floors of the Grandview Country Club's private dining room. 60 of Dad's closest friends, business associates and our extended family had gathered to celebrate his milestone birthday. The room buzzed with conversations about stock portfolios, vacation homes in the Hamptons, and whose children had just graduated from Ivy League schools. I sat quietly at the far end of the mahogany table, picking at my salmon while my family painted their usual picture of my life. To them, I was Sofia Martinez, the 29-year-old daughter who had thrown away her potential by declining the corporate law position at Dad's firm and instead choosing to work in what they called that little tech thing. "Richard, you've raised 3 incredibly successful children," Mrs. Henderson from the country club was saying to my father. "Michael's law practice is thriving, Elena's medical career is so impressive, and then there's—" She paused, glancing at me with that sympathetic look I'd grown accustomed to over the years. "Sophia's still figuring things out," Dad replied diplomatically, but I caught the disappointment in his voice. At 60, Richard Martinez had built Martinez and Associates into one of the most prestigious law firms in the city. He owned a penthouse downtown, a summer house in Martha's Vineyard, and had expectations for his children that I had apparently failed to meet. Mom, elegant in her designer dress and pearl necklace, wasn't quite as diplomatic. "Sophia chose to leave a promising career in law to play around with computers," she explained to the table of guests. "We keep hoping she'll come to her senses and return to something more substantial." My brother Michael, 3 years older and Dad's golden boy, leaned back in his chair with that smug expression I knew so well. "The legal world is competitive, Sophia. Not everyone can handle the pressure. Maybe tech support is more your speed." The table chuckled politely and I saw several guests exchange knowing glances. Elena, my older sister and the family's medical darling, tried to soften the blow. "Sophia's always been the creative one in the family. I'm sure she'll find her path eventually." But even her attempt at kindness felt condescending. For the past 5 years I had maintained the perfect cover. I lived in a modest 1-bedroom apartment in a middle-class neighborhood, drove a 7-year-old Honda Civic, and whenever family asked about work I kept my responses vague. Working on some software projects, I'd say, or helping small businesses with their technology needs. They had no idea that those small businesses included Fortune 500 companies, or that my software projects were revolutionizing entire industries. The truth was, I was the founder and CEO of Quantum Dynamics, a data analytics and artificial intelligence company that had quietly become one of the most valuable private tech companies in the nation. We specialized in predictive analytics for healthcare, financial services, and logistics. Our algorithms could predict market trends with 94% accuracy, optimize supply chains to save companies millions, and help hospitals reduce patient mortality rates by identifying critical patterns doctors missed. But tonight, like every family gathering for the past 5 years, I was just Sophia the disappointment. "You know what your problem is, Sophia?" Uncle Carlos spoke up from across the table, his voice slightly slurred from the wine. "You're afraid of real responsibility. Real success requires sacrifice, commitment to excellence. These little side projects you're always working on, they're just ways to avoid growing up." The conversations around the table had started to quiet down as my family's intervention gained momentum. I could feel 60 pairs of eyes turning toward our end of the table, waiting to see how I'd respond to Uncle Carlos's assessment. Mom seized the moment. She stood up slowly, her champagne glass in hand, and I realized with growing dread that she was about to make this into a public spectacle. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mom began, her voice carrying across the room with the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "As we celebrate Richard's 60th birthday, I think it's important to acknowledge all of our family's achievements." She gestured toward Michael. "Our son Michael, partner at Martinez and Associates, recently won the biggest corporate lawsuit in the firm's history." Applause rippled through the room. "Our daughter Elena just completed her residency at Johns Hopkins and has been accepted into their prestigious cardiothoracic surgery program." More applause and Elena blushed beautifully. Then Mom's expression shifted, and her voice took on a tone I'd heard countless times before. "And then we have Sophia." The room fell completely silent. Sophia, who had every opportunity handed to her. Full scholarship to Stanford. Law school acceptance letter to Harvard. A guaranteed position at one of the most respected firms in the city. My hands remained steady as I reached for my water glass, but inside my heart was pounding. This was worse than their usual private criticisms. Mom was doing this in front of 60 people. Instead, Mom continued, she chose to throw it all away for, what exactly, Sophia? What do you actually do all day? Because honestly, after 5 years, your father and I still don't understand what you've accomplished. The silence was deafening. I could hear the grandfather clock in the corner ticking, the soft clink of silverware as someone nervously adjusted their place setting. Uncle Carlos nodded approvingly. Elena looked uncomfortable but didn't intervene. Michael was practically grinning. So here's to our family. Mom raised her glass higher. And to Richard, who raised 2 incredibly successful children and one. He paused, looking directly at me. One who's still our biggest disappointment. The words hit the room like a physical blow. Several guests gasped softly. Mrs. Henderson looked mortified. Even Dad seemed taken aback by Mom's public cruelty, though he didn't contradict her. That's when my phone rang. The ringtone cut through the silence like a knife. In the world of high-stakes business, there are certain calls you never ignore regardless of timing. This was one of them. The caller ID showed Goldman Sachs Private Banking Priority Line. I need to take this, I said quietly and stood up from the table. Sophia, we're in the middle of, Dad started. One moment, I said and answered the phone. But instead of stepping away for privacy, I remained standing right there at the table. Something in Mom's public humiliation had triggered a decision I'd been postponing for 5 years. Ms. Martinez, came the crisp, professional voice of James Wellington, Senior Vice President at Goldman Sachs. I'm calling to confirm the completion of your acquisition. The $2.8 billion purchase of Harrison Global Technologies has been finalized. All regulatory approvals are in place. The board has approved the transaction, and the funds have been transferred from your Quantum Dynamics account. The room was so quiet that everyone could hear every word coming through my phone's speaker. I watched as the color slowly drained from Mom's face. Additionally, James continued, I wanted to congratulate you on making Forbes' Most Powerful Women in Tech list this week. The article about Quantum Dynamics' revolutionary healthcare AI is generating significant industry attention. I remained perfectly calm as if this conversation was the most natural thing in the world. Thank you, James. Has the Harrison integration team received their instructions for the transition? Yes, ma'am. Your 3,000 new employees will report to Quantum Dynamics leadership starting Monday. The combined company valuation now sits at approximately $8.2 billion, making Quantum Dynamics the 3rd largest private tech company in North America. Mom's champagne glass slipped from her trembling fingers and shattered against the marble floor. The sound seemed to break the spell that had fallen over the room. Excellent, I continued into the phone. Please send my regards to the Harrison board and remind them that the integration bonus packages should be distributed to all employees by Friday. Of course, Ms. Martinez. One final item. The Pentagon has approved your company's contract for the new Defense Analytics Project. The $1.2 billion, 5-year agreement was finalized this afternoon. Perfect timing, I replied. I'll review the contract details tomorrow morning. Thank you for the update, James. I ended the call and looked around the table. 60 faces stared back at me in complete shock. Uncle Carlos's mouth was hanging open. Elena had dropped her fork. Michael looked like he'd seen a ghost. Dad was gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles had turned white. I'm sorry, I said calmly, placing my phone back in my purse. Where were we? Something about disappointing the family? The silence stretched for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Finally, Mrs. Henderson found her voice. Sophia, did that man just say you own a company worth $8 billion? Well, technically $8.2 billion as of today's acquisition, I corrected gently. Quantum Dynamics has been my primary focus for the past 5 years. Quantum Dynamics, whispered Mr. Peterson from Dad's law firm. I've heard of them. They're the ones who revolutionized predictive analytics for medical research. My wife's hospital uses their software to identify at-risk patients. I nodded. That's one of our smaller applications. We also optimize logistics for most major shipping companies, provide market analysis for investment firms, and our defense contracts help protect national security infrastructure. Dad finally found his voice. Sophia, I don't understand. You live in that small apartment, you drive that old car. I live modestly because I believe in reinvesting profits into research and development, I explained. Quantum dynamics employs over 3,000 people now, and we're creating technologies that save lives and improve efficiency across multiple industries. The lifestyle stuff never seemed important. Mom was still staring at the broken glass at her feet. But why didn't you tell us? Why let us think you were struggling? For the first time that evening, I let some emotion creep into my voice. Because every time I tried to share what I was working on, you dismissed it as playing with computers or avoiding real responsibility. You had already decided that success only looked one way, your way. You never asked about my work because you'd already determined it wasn't worth asking about. Uncle Carlos, sobered by the revelation, leaned forward. Sophia, I owe you an apology. We all do. I looked around the table at my family. The same people who had spent years making me feel inadequate, who had just publicly humiliated me in front of 60 people. The same people who were now looking at me with a mixture of awe, respect, and something that looked suspiciously like dollar signs in their eyes. The truth is, I continued, I've been supporting this family financially for the past 2 years without you knowing it. When Dad's firm was struggling during the recession, who do you think provided the anonymous loan that kept you afloat? When Elena needed funding for her medical research, where do you think that grant money actually came from? When Michael's practice needed startup capital, who do you think was behind that investment group that believed in him? Dad's face had gone completely pale. The Morrison Group investment, that was you? That was me, I confirmed. I've been taking care of this family because I love you, despite the fact that you've spent 5 years telling me I'm worthless. The room was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. 60 people who had just witnessed what they thought was a family embarrassment had instead seen one of the most dramatic reversals any of them would probably ever experience. Elena was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. Sophia, I'm so sorry. We had no idea. You had no idea because you never asked, I replied. You decided who I was and what I was worth without ever bothering to find out what I was actually accomplishing. Mom finally looked up from the broken glass. What happens now? She asked quietly. I stood up and gathered my purse. Now I'm going back to work. I have 3,000 employees depending on me, military contracts to review, and a healthcare AI system to launch that could save thousands of lives next year. I walked around the table to Dad and kissed him on the cheek. Happy 60th birthday, Dad. I hope you have many more years of health and happiness. As I headed toward the door, I turned back to address the room one final time. For those of you who are curious, quantum dynamics is always looking for bright, ambitious people who want to change the world. We judge people by their ideas and their work ethic, not by their family connections or their appearance. The last sound I heard as I left the Grandview Country Club was Mom calling my name, but I didn't turn around. I had a company to run, innovations to create, and a world to change. Some disappointments, it turns out, are just victories that nobody bothered to recognize.